Thanks for listening. If you'd like to schedule a one-on-one coaching with Dr. Lodi, please visit drsadaf.com. I'm an American board certified OBGYN, a mom, a Muslim, and I'm talking about sex. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast. Welcome to the Muslim Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sadaf Lodi, and today we have with us Dr. Kesperson, the amazing Dr. Kesperson, who's a urologist in Seattle, outside of Seattle. And this episode is everything you need to know about premature ejaculation. But before I get into it, the first thing I want you to know is that I'm not giving any type of religious or medical advice. So if you have any concerns about your health, please speak with your medical provider. And if you have any questions about your religion, please ask your friendly neighborhood religious leader. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast because I just happen to be a Muslim woman who talks about sex. So hello again, Dr. Kesperson. So excited to have you on and to discuss this important topic. So I'll let you go ahead and get into it. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about premature ejaculation and kind of what the incidence is and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So premature ejaculation, it's funny because in order to study something, you have to define it, right? So it's like, how do you define premature ejaculation? And kind of the general definition is intravaginal latency, right? So the amount of time that you're in a vagina, again, this is very heteronormative ways to describe what the penis is doing, but stereotypically that it's in the vagina and it's not in there long enough to have a satisfying sexual event for both parties is kind of like an overgeneralized. Now, truthfully, there are non-heterosexual people who also have premature ejaculation, but that's kind of the way it was defined. And in order to research it, they have to pick a time. So what sort of time do you pick to say that that's too short and above that's just perfect, right? And so most studies are going to say intravaginal latency less than a minute. I've seen some say intravaginal latency less than 2 minutes. So basically, sex didn't last long enough before you had an orgasm or an ejaculation. Now, where we've kind of gone wrong is not understanding, well, what's a normal intravaginal latency period to begin with, right? Sure. And we watch, a lot of people will watch videos and porn and see people and kind of hear like, oh yeah, we were doing it for an hour and a half, all night long. You know, you hear these stories of like 3 hours we had sex and people start to think that that's normal, right? But if you take the sex researchers and they actually say like, hey, from start to finish in a vagina, how long does the average man take to ejaculate? You're looking at about 3 to 5 minutes, 4 to 7 minutes. Like that's it, right? So I want to kind of normalize like longer isn't better and longer isn't even normal to begin with, because we're not trying to like get people the last 40 minutes. And I would say the average vagina owner, it starts to hurt after a while also, right? And so like making it comfortable for everybody, but really too short, not being in the vagina enough to have it be pleasurable for both partners is the definition of premature ejaculation. More than you wanted to know, but there you go.
Yeah, I'm glad you did that. And I'm glad you clarified what that meant. So what do you think the incidence of that is?
I mean, it's difficult to study, right? Because it's getting people to admit that there's something incredibly like shameful and broken and just a lot of self-judgment on people. So it's difficult to study. You're going to see different ranges. Ballpark, I've seen like 3 to 6% of the population, which I think is pretty high, right? 6%, that's not teeny. But a lot of experts will say that's actually underreporting. So it's probably higher than that.
Right. And what do you think contributes to that? Like, are there any physiologic conditions that may lead to that?
Yeah, I mean, so the researchers will say there's kind of two types, right? There's lifelong, like ever since I was sexually active, this is just how my body's behaved. And then there's with this specific partner, this is how my body behaves, but previous partners, it was not a problem. So they kind of break it down into like it always being there or it's new with a partner. Doctors, as you know, we tend to think very body separate from the mind, right? Which probably hurts us more than helps us. But we're very body centric. We're like, what's wrong with the penis? What's wrong with the pump? What's wrong with the nerves? Should we dull the penis? So they'll do things like lidocaine jelly. They'll actually there's no FDA approved medication for premature ejaculation on the market, but what people will use is they'll use drugs that have a side effect of delayed ejaculation.
Hmm.
So you're actually giving a drug to try to delay or prolong the ejaculation, which for other people on the drug, they're super annoyed by, right? But we're like, we're
Yeah.
actually trying to give you the side effect. And so those tend to be SSRIs, or antidepressants are kind of common ones. They'll use like a really short acting SSRI or an on-demand SSRI to try to give you that on-demand delayed ejaculation. And again, it's the same thing that happened with Viagra. Like once Viagra came on the market, we forgot that the brain played a role in erections. And I would say the average urologist does not refer to sex therapists for these conditions. But certainly there's a big role for sex therapists in both erectile dysfunction and premature ejaculation, in figuring out, is this anxiety? Is it performance anxiety? Is it, a feeling of being in a hurry, or a feeling of I'm out of control, I can't control this? And a lot of what the sex coaches and sex therapists will work on is techniques. So stimulation stop, kind of like an exposure back off, to try to build the endurance to a longer intravaginal latency. So certainly there's a role of the body, there's a role of the mind.
So again, somewhat similar to what you had talked about before was the mindfulness. So I guess that plays into this a lot as well then, right?
Yeah. And that's where, working with the partner and working, because it'd be weird to just try to pull these techniques on somebody, right? Of like, hey, we're going to do this together. I fully support you. I love you no matter what. And working in again, like mindfulness, a non-judgmental arena of like, let's see what happens when we try this. Let's be curious about trying this, instead of like judging it of like, it's got to work this time or else. Like it's too much pressure, and it really takes the joy and fun out of sex. And I think if we always go back to like, sex is supposed to be joyful and feel good and pleasurable. Like it's not just a to-do list, series of exercises to accomplish in your week, of like, remember what this is supposed to be for and work as a team will always get you farther than judgment and, negative thoughts like that.
Sure. And so you had mentioned a little bit before about the psychological causes, and you mentioned depression. Any other psychological or neurologic causes that might result in this?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of any other like underlying disease states. It tends to be more like anxiety or performance anxiety, things like that. And then some people that's the way their body's made. Like that's how they've always have been. And again, going back to that heteronormative view of what sex is if you don't expand, pleasure for your partner or pleasure for yourself outside of the situation that makes you have an ejaculation really fast, it might not be as enjoyable as, hey, let's spend some time outside the vagina. Let's spend some time focusing on her pleasure. Let's do things that make me feel good, but don't result in an orgasm right away. Really being curious about intimacy and sex outside of that very narrow penis and vagina paradigm that has kind of been spoon-fed to us from the beginning.
Sure. I guess, and you had talked about this on your other podcast, is that communication being so important in a relationship, right? And to expand our knowledge and what intimacy means to us so that there are other options, right? And going back to your book, that you are not broken if this happens. Right?
Yeah. Like a podcast that a lot of people like is, I did it a while ago now. It's like, your partner is not broken. And I think, again, I'm gender stereotyping, but it's like we're pretty harsh on our partners sometimes. You need to be perfect. You need to do this better. I'm going to critique you over here. Truthfully, I think a lot of that comes from women feeling judged a lot in our society, right? Like we're not perfect, so we want to help other people be perfect because of course, that's what we've been told. So I do see a lot of that. Again, I don't think that directly leads to premature ejaculation, but certainly coming to a sexual problem with more of a loving and understanding and curiosity and compassion is going to get you a lot farther than being like, you just need to fix that, that kind of judgment that doesn't go well.
Right. And so are there any other biologic factors, any hormone levels or brain chemicals or anything like that may inflammation or infection that may result in something like this?
No. And again, I think probably part of the problem is just the paucity of research. Studying sexual function in America is actually very challenging. There's not a lot of funding that goes towards that. A lot of the good sex research is in Canada. Canada supports that a lot better. But certainly we've got way more knowledge of erectile dysfunction than premature ejaculation. I'd say premature ejaculation is kind of like the cousin who gets ignored all the time. But we don't have a lot, and to show we don't have a lot of medications to help. We don't have enough sex therapists to help, all this stuff. So I think couples are left in the dark. So it's through people like you who are like, understand that this is a common thing that couples struggle with, to help normalize the conversation and to be like, no, this is a thing. We might not know a lot about it, but it's certainly a thing.
Right. And are there any complications that may occur if you have untreated premature ejaculation?
Breakups.
Yeah. All right.
It's not physically dangerous.
Yeah.
For yourself. People, again, this is getting into the like historical theorizing, like, well, is there an evolutionary advantage to having premature ejaculation? Right? Like, why does it exist even? And that's for people much smarter than me, but it's fun to think about.
Yeah. And you mentioned a little bit about treatment for premature ejaculation. You said it kind of happened as a side effect. You mentioned the antidepressants, SSRIs, anything else and you mentioned also lidocaine gel. How does that work?
Well, if you just numb the sensations to the penis, it's going to take more activity to get to an orgasm, right? Now, what usually happens is the female ends up getting numbed too, right? Unless you're going to wear a condom, but even just wearing a condom itself can be numbing, right? To help basically dull the sensations going to the brain.
Right.
But most couples don't love that. It's an option. But I think if you truly want to, if you can, air quote, cure it, would be working on communication, the sexual script, sex coaching, sex therapists, really understanding people's bodies, and then figuring out what works for you as a couple.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was just about to ask you that, and you kind of stole my thunder. I was just going to ask you what key takeaways would you tell somebody that may be experiencing this? How can they get help? Who should they approach? Stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I want to tell people is like, you're not alone. It's actually pretty darn common. It's normal to have a feeling of inadequacy and shame. Like everything that's coming up is a normal processing of having anything wrong with our body, right? Certainly, I think sex therapists and coaches really can help in dealing with the psychological component of it. The sex therapists are the ones who are really trained as far as like techniques and feedback and how that work. They're the ones who are trained in actually walking a couple through those sort of techniques. Barry McCarthy, again, Rekindling Desire, great for sexless marriages. And he talks a lot about premature ejaculation and erectile dysfunction in that book. So I think it's a great resources for couples who have found that all of the intimacy has gone away because of the problem with the penis.
Sure. It's amazing. And of course, we wouldn't be complete without you telling us a little bit about your book and how people can purchase your book and where they can get it.
Yeah, the book's called You're Not Broken, Stop Shitting All Over Your Sex Life. There's actually a chapter in there about the male bits, the male parts. So it's really for all genders to understand all body parts, because you got to know what you're working with and playing and understanding it on a better level, right? So certainly it's for men who want to understand their female partners, but it's also for any gender and any sexual orientation, just to understand the sexuality, which is an inherent in all of us, but we kind of have to uncover all of these layers of shame in society and, silence that have kind of added the undue burden on top of our sexuality. So find it on Amazon. It's an ebook, paperback, hardcover. Audiobook will be out later this year because I still have to record that in Seattle.
Awesome. And of course, your Instagram handle and your TikTok handles, if you could just let us know.
Yeah, the Instagram's Kelly Casperson MD, and I'm pretty sure TikTok's the same. I'm not a huge TikTok fan, but I think I set it up the same. And then the website's kellycaspersonmd.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for speaking to us and letting our listeners know about premature ejaculation. And if our listeners missed the other podcast that we had about erectile dysfunction, that is also available on the Muslim Sex Podcast. And I think we are done here. So it's been real and really intimate. And remember, this is not meant to be any medical advice. So if you're having any problems with either premature ejaculation or erectile dysfunction, please see your healthcare provider for any concerns you may have. And until next time, this is the Muslim Sex Podcast. Thanks. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to schedule a one-on-one coaching with Dr. Lodi, please visit drsadaf.com. And until next time, this is the Muslim Sex Podcast.